Social media, a place where people showcase their best moments, their vacations, designer clothes, luxury cars, and seemingly perfect relationships. But what happens when that picture-perfect life is nothing more than an illusion? When the curated facade hides something far more sinister? Today, we're diving into the shocking case of Andre Zachary Rebelo, a well-known influencer from Perth, Australia, whose life looked like a dream on Instagram. He was young, wealthy, at least that's what his followers believed. But behind the glamorous post was a man drowning in debt, desperate to keep up appearances. And in his desperation, he orchestrated an unthinkable crime. This is a story of deception, fraud, and murder. A chilling reminder that what we see online is often far from the truth. I'm Don, and you're listening to True Crime Revealed, where we uncover the dark realities behind true crime cases that shock the world. Let's begin. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we first need to look at the key players in this story, those whose lives would be forever changed by the deception, financial struggles, and ultimately, an unthinkable crime. Born in 1996, Andre Rebelo seemed to have it all: youth, good looks, and a lifestyle that many envied. At just 19, he met the woman who would change his life forever, Gracie Piscopo. She wasn't just another beautiful face on social media. She was ambitious, determined, and rising fast in the influencer world. Andre was captivated. But Andre wasn't just in awe of Gracie. He saw an opportunity. He dropped out of university to become her manager, handling brand deals and finances. At first, this decision seemed like a smart move, but his earnings were modest, only about $20,000 a year. Compared to Gracie's skyrocketing success, it was pocket change. Still, Andre wasn't content with living in Gracie's shadow. He wanted to carve out his own financial empire. He turned to cryptocurrency, believing it would be his ticket to wealth and status. He assured Gracie that his investments would pay off in time. But behind closed doors, things weren't as promising as he made them seem. Gracie Piscopo's rise to fame was fast and lucrative. She had once worked as a gym receptionist, but when she began posting photos online, her life changed overnight. With millions of followers and brand sponsorships pouring in, she quickly became one of Australia's most recognizable influencers. By the time she and Andre had a child together, she was earning around $170,000 a year, more than enough to fund a life of luxury. Their social media was filled with glamorous vacations, expensive shopping sprees, and high-end cars. Together, they painted the picture of a perfect, thriving couple. But what their followers didn't know was that their luxurious lifestyle wasn't exactly what it seemed. At the heart of this story is Colleen Rebelo, Andre's mother. A devoted single mother of four, she had raised her children after her marriage ended in 2010. She worked tirelessly as a teacher, ensuring her family had a stable life. But as her children grew older, she decided to follow her own dreams. At 58, she returned to school to start a new career in healthcare. Despite her love for her son, Colleen had concerns about Andre's choices. She wasn't convinced that social media fame was a long-term career. She worried about his decision to drop out of university, his reliance on Gracie's success, and his risky cryptocurrency investments. She wanted stability for her son, but Andre had other plans. Then, on May 25, 2020, Colleen Rebelo was found dead in her home under mysterious circumstances. What first seemed like an unexpected tragedy would soon unravel into something far more sinister. Coming up next, we'll dive into the events leading up to Colleen's shocking death and how Andre's carefully curated online life was beginning to crumble beneath him. They say social media is a highlight reel, a place where people share the best parts of their lives. But what happens when that highlight reel is built on lies? When every post, every luxury is just an illusion? For Andre Rebelo and Gracie Piscopo, their Instagram perfect life was a carefully curated facade, and behind that facade, a ticking time bomb. From the outside, they were living the dream, a glamorous couple, traveling the world, staying in five-star resorts, driving luxury cars, and wearing designer labels. But behind closed doors, it was a very different story. The truth was, Andre and Gracie were drowning in debt. They owed $120,000 and the number was growing. They were behind on their rent, struggling to make car payments, and barely keeping their heads above water. While Gracie was the face of their success, Andre was the one managing their finances, and he was hiding just how bad things had become. For years, Andre had reassured Gracie that their financial future was secure. His cryptocurrency investments would soon pay off, and they'd be wealthier than ever. But the reality? Those investments had completely failed. After 3 years, the man who called himself a crypto expert had made exactly $22 in profit. He was losing control. Debt collectors were calling, bills were piling up, and still they continued living a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Andre refused to let the illusion crack. He knew that if Gracie discovered the truth, everything would fall apart. And then Andre made a decision, a terrifying, calculated decision. Coming up next, we'll dive into the tragic final hours of Colleen Rebelo, what really happened on May 25th, 2020, and the shocking details that made investigators question if her death was truly an accident or something much more sinister. May 25th, 2020. It started like any other morning in the Rebelo household. Colleen, a devoted mother, went about her day as usual, speaking to her children, making plans. There was no sign that anything was wrong, no warning, no indication that this would be the last day of her life. Her youngest son, Fabian, had work that day. As always, his mother had promised to pick him up at 2 p.m. She was never late. She was never unreachable. But that afternoon, she didn't show up. At first, Fabian thought there must be a simple explanation. Maybe she got caught up with something. Maybe she lost track of time. But as the minutes passed, his concern grew. He called her. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He called 13 times. Silence. Something wasn't right. Feeling uneasy, Fabian walked home, his mind racing. It wasn't a long walk, just 10 to 15 minutes. But with each step, his worry grew. When he reached the house, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped inside, calling out for his mother. No response. And then he heard something. The shower was running. Maybe she just didn't hear him. Maybe everything was fine, but deep down, Fabian had a terrible feeling. He called her name again. Still nothing. The water kept running, but there was no movement, no sound beyond the steady stream of the shower. Something was wrong. His stomach tightened as he approached the bathroom door. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. He hesitated. What if she was just taking a shower? What if he was overreacting? But he couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. He pushed the door open, and what he saw inside would haunt him forever. There, under the running water, was his mother, kneeling on the floor, leaning lifelessly against the shower wall. Her body was still. Her skin felt cold, and her face had turned a strange bluish gray. For a split second, his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. This wasn't happening. But then instinct kicked in. In a panic, he pulled her out of the shower, laying her in the middle of the bathroom floor. He grabbed a towel, covered her, and called emergency services. His voice shook as he told them what he had found. As he waited for help to arrive, he tried to save her. He pressed down on her chest, trying to restart her heart. He performed CPR over and over. The warm shower water still ran, but her body remained cold. The color in her face was gone. He was desperate, praying she would wake up. But deep down, he already knew. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. Colleen Rebelo was gone. At first, it seemed like an inexplicable tragedy. There was no obvious cause of death, no wounds, no struggle. Even an autopsy was inconclusive. How could a perfectly healthy 58-year-old woman just die in the shower? Her children were devastated, but something didn't sit right. There were details that didn't make sense, and soon those little details would unravel into a horrifying truth, one that no one was prepared for. Coming up next, we dive into the strange inconsistencies that made Colleen's family question everything. What was Andre hiding, and why was he in such a hurry to claim the life insurance money? When someone dies unexpectedly, especially in their own home, those left behind search for answers. And in the days following Colleen Rebelo's death, her children struggled to make sense of what had happened. She had no life-threatening health conditions, no history of sudden medical episodes, No reason to believe she wouldn't wake up that morning, go about her day, and pick up her son from work, just as she had promised. At first, it seemed like an unexplained tragedy, a medical mystery. Even the police found no obvious cause for concern. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible injuries, no struggle. They ruled it a natural death. But something about that didn't sit right with Colleen's family. Fabian, the son who had found her lifeless in the shower, kept replaying the moment in his mind. The water was still running, her body was cold, and then there were the little things, things that didn't make sense. His mother was a woman of routine, of habit, and that morning something was off. For one, she was still wearing her jewelry and gold wristwatch. It was a small detail, but an important one. Colleen always took them off before stepping into the shower, always. But on the day she died, she still had them on. And then there was the anti-slip mat. Colleen had used it every single time she took a shower. It was something she never skipped, especially because of her minor heart condition. But on this day, it wasn't in place. Instead, it had been draped over the bathtub, almost as if someone had moved it. Still, with no immediate evidence of foul play, the family had no choice but to accept the police's conclusion. Colleen was gone, and the answers weren't coming. Until weeks later, an unexpected call changed everything. An insurance company had flagged something suspicious. A life insurance claim had been filed. And not just one, 3 separate policies had been taken out in Colleen's name. The beneficiary? Andre Rebelo, and only Andre Rebelo. In total, he stood to gain $1.15 million. His siblings? They weren't named in any of the policies. They wouldn't see a single cent. That alone was strange. But what truly set off alarm bells was how quickly Andre moved. Just 3 days after his mother's death, he was already making calls, demanding the insurance payout. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment. The insurance company wasn't convinced. Something about the timing, the paperwork, the sheer eagerness to claim the money made them hesitate. And when they started digging deeper, the lies began to unravel. The documents Andre submitted were forged. The insurance company found a falsified autopsy report, one that conveniently stated Colleen had died of a ruptured aneurysm causing a subarachnoid hemorrhage. But there was a problem. No such autopsy had ever been performed. And then another shocking discovery. Andre hadn't just faked insurance paperwork. He had also forged his own mother's will. In the altered version, he had named himself the sole heir to her estate. The deception was extensive, methodical, and most of all, cold. But with each lie that surfaced, one question grew louder and louder. Had Andre Rebelo done more than just commit fraud? Had he orchestrated his mother's death? Investigators now had a new theory. Maybe Colleen's death wasn't natural at all. Maybe it was planned. And maybe the man who had spent his life carefully curating a fake image online had taken that illusion to deadly extremes. Coming up next, we uncover the shocking revelations that turned this case from a financial fraud investigation into a murder inquiry. What really happened in Colleen Rebelo's home on that fateful morning? And why was Andre so desperate to keep the truth buried? With the insurance fraud exposed, investigators had their first real lead in the mysterious death of Colleen Rebelo. What had once seemed like a tragic but natural passing was now something far more sinister. The question was no longer if something suspicious had happened, it was how deep the deception went. And as detectives began piecing together the puzzle, the truth became even darker than they had imagined. One of the first things investigators noticed was that Andre had wiped his digital footprint. After July 2020, there were no online records, no search history, no emails, no traces of his activity. It was as if he had deliberately erased everything. But why? What was he hiding? Then there was something even more alarming. Colleen's driving license was missing. No one in the family knew where it had gone, but soon they made a disturbing discovery. Andre had redirected all of his mother's mail to his own address. Every bill, every document, every piece of correspondence that should have been going to Colleen's home was now going straight to him. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated move. And then there was the car. On the day Colleen died, around 1:30 p.m., her sister, Andre's aunt, was driving past her home when she saw a vehicle parked in the driveway, a car she didn't recognize. It stood out to her, but at the time she didn't think much of it. That was until weeks later when she saw the exact same car at Colleen's funeral. And this time she saw who was getting into it. It was Andre. When police questioned him, Andre denied everything. He insisted he had no involvement in his mother's death. But as the evidence mounted, his story began to shift. First, he claimed that Colleen had been suicidal, that she had expressed deep sadness about aging, and in his words, had even said that it might be better if she were no longer alive. But there was a problem with that story. No one else in the family had ever heard her say anything like that. Not Fabian, not Monique, not Julian. None of her children had ever seen signs that she was struggling. In fact, Colleen had just earned a degree at 58 years old. She was excited to start a new career. She had plans. And then a huge contradiction emerged. Andre's partner, Gracie Piscopo, had been asked about his whereabouts on the day of Colleen's death. Her response? It didn't match his. Gracie stated that on that morning she and her cousin had plans to go to lunch. But when it was time to leave, she realized Andre was gone. She had no idea where he had gone, and more importantly, he hadn't told her he was leaving. She called him 12 times. No answer. She texted him, still no response. According to Gracie, Andre vanished for hours, and when he finally returned at 2:00 p.m., he acted completely normal. He casually asked where they wanted to go for lunch, as if nothing had happened. But then, something even more disturbing came to light. By now, investigators were convinced Andre had planned everything, but they needed proof. They needed something concrete, so they took an extraordinary step. Police placed surveillance devices inside Andre and Gracie's home. They installed a listening device in the bedroom and a hidden camera in the living room. And for 3 months, they monitored every conversation. And what they heard was damning. From the recordings, it became clear that Gracie knew nothing about the insurance fraud. She was furious. She told Andre that he had put her in a terrible position, that this could ruin her career, that she could lose everything. She was afraid, not just for herself, but for her son. But Andre, he was confident. He told her not to worry, that nothing would happen to him, that he would get the insurance payout and they could leave the country. Andre wasn't just lying to the world. He was lying to the woman he claimed to love. He was hiding the truth from everyone. But now the walls were closing in. Coming up next, we take a closer look at how investigators finally closed in on Andre Rebelo and how his years of deception finally led to his downfall. For nearly 2.5 years after Colleen Rebelo's mysterious death, her family lived with uncertainty. They had questions but no answers, suspicions but no justice. Meanwhile, Andre Rebelo continued living his life as though nothing had changed, posting online, playing the role of a devoted father and partner, maintaining the illusion of wealth and success. But that illusion was finally about to shatter. In November 2022, police made their move. Andre Rebelo was arrested and charged with the murder of his own mother. The man who had spent years crafting a carefully curated public image was now standing before the world. Not as a successful investor, not as a devoted son, but as a man accused of cold-blooded murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The fraudulent insurance claims, the forged will, the missing driver's license, the erasure of his digital footprint, the suspicious timeline, the fact that he was at the house that morning and never mentioned it, and perhaps, most chilling of all, the fact that he had tried to claim his mother's life insurance payout just 3 days after her death. But despite all of this, there was one major hurdle for prosecutors. There was no direct physical evidence that Andre had killed his mother. No fingerprints, no DNA, no recorded confession. So how do you convict someone of murder without proving exactly how they did it? The prosecution had a difficult task ahead of them. When Andre's trial began in October 2024, it quickly became clear that the defense would argue that Colleen had died naturally, that her passing was just a tragic event, unrelated to Andre's financial crimes. But expert testimony would soon cast serious doubts on that claim. Medical examiners were called to the stand. They testified that while Colleen's official cause of death was inconclusive, the injuries on her body told a different story. Small abrasions were found on her eyebrows and arms, at first dismissed as insignificant. But forensic specialists had a different theory. Those small abrasions could have been caused by a struggle, by someone pressing a pillow over her face, a method of suffocation that leaves no obvious signs of trauma. If done correctly, it could mimic a natural death, and in this case, it nearly worked. The jury listened as forensic scientists explained that suffocation, particularly when done in a controlled environment, can leave minimal evidence. And given the timeline, the financial motive, and the forged documents, there was only one logical conclusion. Colleen Rebelo hadn't died naturally. She had been murdered. For 8 weeks, the trial played out. The defense tried to argue that Andre had simply made poor financial choices, that he had committed fraud but was not a killer. But his own lies, his own desperation, and his own contradictions painted a different story. And on December 5th, 2024, after 2 days of jury deliberations, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. Andre Rebelo was found guilty of his mother's murder. The same man who had built his life on deceit had finally been exposed. And this time, there was no escaping the truth. For Colleen's family, the verdict brought relief, but it did not erase the pain. A mother, a teacher, a woman who had spent her life caring for her children had been betrayed by the very son she had raised. And for what? For money. For an illusion. But Andre's story wasn't over just yet. The final chapter would come in April 2025, when his sentence would be handed down. And the expectation? Life in prison. No parole, no escape, no more lies. And as for the fraud charges, there will be no trial. Andre has already admitted to them. The insurance fraud, the forged will, the deception, it was all real. And yet none of it was enough. Because in the end, his plan failed. He didn't get the money. He didn't get away with it. A man who had once claimed to be a master of manipulation, who had fooled thousands online into believing he was a wealthy entrepreneur, will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. And his crime, the murder of his own mother, wasn't just about money. It was about desperation, arrogance, and the belief that he was smarter than everyone else. But in the end, the truth caught up with him. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the world we live in today. Social media isn't real life. What we see online is often a filtered, curated illusion, designed to impress, to gain followers, to appear perfect. But behind the scenes, the reality is often much darker. It also exposes the extremes of financial desperation, how the pressure to maintain an image, to live beyond one's means can lead someone to commit unthinkable acts. Andre could have come clean about his struggles. He could have made different choices. Instead, he chose murder, and in the end, it didn't save him. It only sealed his fate. As we close this chapter, we're left with one final thought. Real life can't be filtered like an Instagram post. The truth always emerges, no matter how well it's hidden. And for Andre Rebelo, the truth was his downfall. Thank you for joining us for this episode of True Crime Revealed. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that reveal the dark truths behind seemingly perfect lives. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not everything is as it seems.